The primary way that I hear God's voice is, of course, through His Word. When I read His Word, Holy Spirit within me gives me nudges and prompts and sometimes highlights the actual words on the page. It always amazes me. But I have kind of a neat story of taking a chance and hearing God with somebody else. Many years ago, Maria and I were listening to some teaching on just this topic of hearing God's voice and responding to Him. And I think the name of the teacher was Paul Hawkins, if I remember correctly. And Paul Hawkins, he said, ask God if there's something He wants you to give away. Well, that's no problem for Maria because she's a generous person. I'm a bit of a tightwad. I'm a little bit stingy. So we went and we separately asked God if there was something that we should give away. Well, Maria heard Bibles, which, perfect. But she didn't hear anything else. That's all she heard was the word Bibles. And I went away and prayed, and I heard the word Ethiopia. Of all things, Ethiopia. So God and I had this conversation. Lord, Ethiopia is not mine to give. And I felt like He just said, be patient and wait. So I, of course, in my pride, didn't talk to Maria about this. And we went to church that weekend, and there was a nice man who got up and talked, and he gave a special presentation at our church. And you know what he talked about? He was raising funds for Bibles to Ethiopia. Well, Maria and I looked at each other, and she said, Bibles, that's what I heard. And I looked at her and I said, Ethiopia, that's what I heard. And God had revealed to each of us a certain piece, and it was so sweet because He not only affirmed in us our ability to hear God's voice, but He affirmed in us our ability to hear Him together. And it was such a great thing for our marriage and for our relationship going forward. And it set us up to work together to hear Him in the future. But it was such an encouraging story. I wanted to share it with you and just to say, listen to God with other people and be bold and take a step, and He will speak to you because He wants to and because He loves you.
When I think about hearing God's voice in my own life, yeah, there's some dramatic moments that I think back to from time to time, but mostly the practice of hearing God's voice in my life is pretty subtle. There's these nudges and whispers that just sound like Jesus to me. One of the ways that I see that coming up a lot is in just when I'm prompted to think about someone or someone comes to mind. You know, in the past, I'd be at my desk or working or driving, and someone would come to mind. I'd be thinking about them, and I would leave it at that I just thought of that person. What I started to realize as life went along is that so often I feel like that's the promptings of God's Spirit, asking me to pray for someone or encourage someone or send a quick text or message to them just to let them know that I'm paying attention to what's going on in their life. When someone's name or face comes to mind, it's rarely like this moment where, you know, someone like Morgan Freeman is out in the middle of space speaking to me with this booming voice. It's that nudge, it's that whisper, it's the voice of familiarity. It's a voice of love and compassion and mercy that's actually prompting me to think about someone else other than myself, and to perhaps send a word of encouragement or an insight, or just let someone know that they're loved that day. And I feel like that's one of the main ways that God is speaking to me these days, is having me think less about myself, more about others, and then responding with words of encouragement, words of courage, words of attentiveness that hopefully builds their souls. And that's how I hear God speaking to me the most these days.